and introduce our panelists, I think in the order that I'm going to read them. So from the YWCA of Boulder County, Debbie Pope, thank you for being here, CEO. From Zonta Foothills Club of Boulder County, Pam Malls-Bender, welcome Pam, board member there. From Adelante, Michelle Carpenter, who's advanced placement Spanish teacher at Boulder High School, and much more. And you've met Tanya Chaides, who is also an alumni advisor, Puentes scholarship coordinator at KIPP through college, and as you've seen, a Modus theater performer, so welcome to you all. Thank you. We know education doesn't guarantee success in life, but it can be a pretty good indicator, a pretty good predictor of success in the job market and housing and in general financial stability. As an aside, the Community Foundation has been involved in the Opportunity Gap through programs such as El Paso. We'd like to explore your experience working with immigrant students and families who are navigating the educational system. And let's start, if we could, with you, Michelle, in Adelante. What percentage of Boulder Valley School District families are mixed status, and what's the impact of immigrant status on a student's education in school and as a lifelong learner, too?
Super. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. There we are. So mixed status, first of all, means when some folks in the family were born here in the United States and some were not. And I would say the majority of the Latinx population that I'm working with at Boulder High School are from mixed status families. That's a real challenge because for many of our students, as we've heard before, they're worried about their family members being deported. They've heard stories. And obviously that's going to affect their learning. That fear of family members' deportation or that of their own is omnipresent. In addition, as we've heard from some of our folks tonight, there was pre-immigration trauma. Many of the families that we work with fled their original countries because of horrible poverty, horrible violence, and so there was that pre-immigration trauma. You've all heard those horrific stories of what happened during immigration. So many of our students have been through that as well. Once they get here, there are the post-journey stressors. And so what happens is this trauma is internalized and will present often as PTSD or anxiety and depression, like Jorge was talking about, the needs for mental health support in this community. It's real. And that makes learning a challenge. And it's even more a challenge when you don't have someone to talk to about it. It doesn't ever go away. It's always there. And for so many of our students, that attempt to push it away so that they can learn is really difficult. So if the parents are undocumented or unable to apply their education from another country to what they're trying to do here in the United States, they generally will work in marginalized, low-paying, oftentimes back-breaking jobs, 2 or 3 of them. The families will suffer a lack of economic stability. They move quite often. There's food insecurity. And a lot of our students will work up to 40 hours a week doing things like cleaning offices at night and then be expected to show up ready to learn the next morning. And then in terms of lifelong learning, that impact also is substantial. So low-income students are much more likely to miss school. They don't have access to tutors, to folks to help them with college applications, to prepare for their SATs. The students are less likely to enroll in advanced courses. You can see that in the trends report. Securing financing for college is also very tricky. And approximately 50% fewer Latinx students will pursue college than their Anglo peers. And those that do are 3 times more likely to need remedial courses. Those students who need remedial courses are much less likely to graduate from college. Without a college degree, they're stuck in that same cycle of poverty. So, in summary, although we're making great strides in terms of graduation rate in empowering students, there's still a whole lot of work to be done.
Thank you, Michelle. Tanya, if you could tell us a little bit about KIPP, what it is, and then in working with KIPP students in Denver, what you find are the most important resources for DACA and undocumented students.
Sure. So KIPP is a national charter network. It's available in many different states across the nation, including Colorado. And we have 2 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 2 high schools. I don't work in any of them. I work with students who have graduated from said high schools and are now off in the workforce or off in college doing whatever it is they're doing with life after high school. And when I first got to my position, I was hired to run the scholarship program, right? Like there's the scholarship program specifically for undocumented students who graduate from KIPP Colorado schools, which is incredible. And then I quickly told my supervisors, this isn't enough. This isn't getting my students through college. This isn't supporting them through what they need. So a few years later, now we have a few more supports in place for them. It's not just the scholarship that they're receiving to get their education. It's also DACA Renewal Fund money. It's also, the advice of myself. And connections to each other, connections to local resources. We just launched a mentorship program so that they can sort of, build that power amongst themselves as well. But I think what I would answer to that question is a little more broadly for students outside of KIPP. What I've seen that is the most important resource for students is knowledge about how to make it without DACA. And in my experience, this means knowledge in how to start your own business, how to do an LLC and contract your work with other people, other companies. And oftentimes when I mention this to my students, they're like, well, starting a business sounds really hard. And I'm like, it's actually pretty easy. You pay $50 to the Secretary of State in Colorado, and then you have an LLC. The hard part is the accounting. And that's where students really need support in figuring out the taxes of an LLC and figuring out, what does contracting really mean for the long term. But if we could focus the narrative around that, then my students who have DACA and my students who don't have DACA would feel so much more motivated about their future because there's possibilities.
Thank you. Debbie, what resources does the YWCA provide to immigrant families to help them steer through the complexities of the educational system and to find opportunities too during these challenging times?
Thanks. Thank you. I'm still so moved by your story. Anyway, this is my life's work too. So you have someone trying actively to be an ally. So anyway, thank you. I just wanted to share that. So at the YWCA, our mission is eliminating racism and empowering women and girls, which really encompasses empowering our whole community. We believe in starting an early childhood education, and we start at 6 weeks old at the YWCA. We are the only drop-in sliding scale program for early childhood care, actually in the entire Front Range. And what we see is we do see a lot of families going through a lot of transition, and we do see immigrant families in this space right now as well. And we are trying to make sure we're creating an open and safe environment for these families. And that means recognizing and acknowledging the fear in this community right now. And we believe we're creating a space for them where if they are undocumented, there are not questions from us. We are not sharing their information with any other agencies. We don't have federal grants, so we're not reporting that information. And really all we ask is that we have take the information we would for any family. And that doesn't require a driver's license or anything. So I say that because it's so, we talk a lot about, we also have a high school program I'm going to talk about in a minute. But what we've realized, if we don't start very early, it is so painful to see what these families and these kids, the inequities that are in place structurally. And so if we don't start at the very beginning and try to be disruptors in that, the longer term plan looks very different. And so that's a part of what we're doing. We're doing in that place, as Hori talked about too, the health equity. So we have a nutritionist on site. We have a wellness coordinator, so that these kids and parents, these families are being exposed and having opportunities to this. I think I just want to share this quick story because we're in Boulder County and we talk about being a really progressive community. We pride ourselves on this, and I think sometimes that gets in the way of seeing the reality of what's really happening. And one of those things is that we pride ourselves on being able to have organic food for these kids and have a nutritionist that's making their meals. And it was brought up that it was like, oh, isn't organic food too expensive? And it's like, too expensive for what? For our children in our facility? And it was that moment, right, where everybody kind of had to pause. And it's like, no, that's equity. There should be no reason that these children shouldn't be able to get good organic food, right? So I bring those up as points because that's a place for all of us too to stop and pause when we have those thoughts in our heads that come up of really checking ourselves. And the other thing we're doing is we just started a STEM program for girls between 5th and 8th grade. It's a collaboration with Google and with the Hispanic Heritage Foundation. It is a program we've designed to be culturally relevant and is specifically aimed for girls of color. And it also is for those where English may be their second language. And so we've just started and launched that program, and we'll have about 240 young girls of color who go through that program, who go to Google, and they actually go through learning about how to code, but they also do a panel with Googler women who they can identify with and have stories and they can see themselves in. And then they go on a tour of Google, which I know sounds like, maybe not a big deal, but when you're in 5th or 8th grade, Google's like your world. And so being able to do that tour at the end of the day for them, it's just amazing to see the confidence, because that's another space we really want them to early on feel like, I belong here. There's no reason I shouldn't be here. I can work at Google someday. And finally, we're working with our program called LASS, which is the Latina Achievement Support Program, and that's with the high school students. And we do have this set up so that the advocates who are college women are Latina and are working with high school young women. And they're designing programming with them with the goal, of course, to support them through graduation and to go on to post-secondary. But because of, I believe, this attack that's taking place in our country right now, it has become even more important for them to be able to have the support they're needed. I think the emotional strain on these young women is incredible right now, and we have to be paying attention to that as well. And I know we all see that. So that we see when we see a 98% rate of those young women going on to post-secondary, that's, everyone says, oh, that's so great. But it's more about when you ask these young women really what made the program so special. And it's like, it's because I had a youth advocate that went with me to CERC when my dad was detained by ICE. And she was the first person I called. It's the young women in their group that support each other and have supported one another getting into advanced classes and reminding each other that they're not imposters being in there and they're support each other. So I know I used probably all my time for all 3 questions, so that gives mostly, those are some of the programs that we're doing.